and welcome to Housing and Economic Development. I'm Michael Shea, the host for Housing and Economic Development, the program on Arlington Independent Media, where we've been learning about some of the organizations and groups that have been working to make affordable housing a reality in Arlington and make it a more inclusive community. We're joined today by Mary Rouleau, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Housing Solutions, a group that's been very active for quite some years now in fostering dialogue and encouraging the community to achieve affordable housing. Mary, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so now let's just maybe lay out some of the key facts and things and trends that have been going on in our community, and maybe not just in Arlington, but kind of the region, in terms of housing and the economy.
Well, there's one key trend, and that's it costs more.
Right.
Rents are rising at a very high rate and have been for several years. We don't have the supply we need to kind of mitigate that cost issue. I mean, it's very much a simple problem to describe. It is not a simple problem to solve.
Right.
Now, what has been a big trend that started roughly in about the year 2000 and continues to this day, but was really dramatic from 2000 to 2008, are units that were in the private market but were nonetheless affordable, at least to families making roughly 60% of median income. We have a high median. So for a family of four, for example, that's about $70,000. So those units were generally available and affordable to people in that kind of mid-salary range. But then with the takeoff in rents and redevelopment, a lot of this was really activity running up to the market crash in 2008. We lost literally over 10,000 of those units in Arlington. They became unaffordable, largely just through rent increases. In some cases, they were knocked down and redeveloped into something higher end, or they were rehabbed into something higher end. But that's where the real crisis came in, is when we started losing all those market rate affordable units. So the Alliance started in 2003. Started by a group of Arlingtonians, longtime Arlingtonians, who've been active in a number of issues, who really were becoming increasingly concerned about the price of housing, both single-family housing and rental, or ownership and rental, and thought that even though there were other organizations that already existed in Arlington, there was no single organization that was solely dedicated to the housing issue from an education and advocacy perspective. We do not own bricks and mortar. We work with nonprofit developers and for-profit developers who include affordable housing. But this is strictly an education and advocacy group.
Right. And you got involved several years ago.
About 3.5, 4 years ago.
So where were you coming from? What motivated you to want to get involved with the housing?
Well, I actually kind of cut my teeth in housing on the Arna Valley project, if you remember that from the late 90s. And that was, as you know, kind of a community uprising as a pushback to what the developer was then proposing, which was to knock that garden-style apartment complex down, which was displacing, I don't remember the numbers, but I want to say several hundred families at the time. And they were basically going to be able to proceed and essentially do it, what we call by right, with very little ability of the county to mitigate. And the community just rose up. Mm-hmm. And I was stumbling along and got sucked into the vortex, and really it was a real education experience for me about what some of the challenges were for housing, right, how we needed that community push to hold the developers accountable. The developers ended up doing some positive things, which I believe to this day only happened because the community rose up and really yelled and screamed.
Right.
So I got involved in affordable housing back then as a volunteer, if you will. Ran into Charlie Rinker, who, if you know anything about affordable housing in this community, you know that Charlie Rinker has been involved and been one of the moral forces in this community for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so a group of us kind of hung together after the Arna Valley experience and started a 501c3 called Arlington New Directions Coalition. So I did all of that as a volunteer. And our Arlington New Directions Coalition worked on a variety of issues that were primarily impacting people, lower and moderate income people, working people. And then I kind of jumped ship and went off and became a high school teacher and kind of disappeared for 5 years, literally, and that was my life's work at the time. And I stepped back from it for a variety of reasons, and some folks who were running on the board, who were running AHS, reached out to me because the then executive director was leaving to take a posting with her husband overseas. Mm-hmm. So I had the background as a volunteer.
Right. That's an important background. So you got involved, and what are some of the things that the Alliance has done it regularly does.
Well, we
to
have
pass on.
several annual, if you will, public education events. We have a State of Affordable Housing meeting that we have in the spring. We have the Lecky Forum in the fall, and then we have the last 5 years, we've had the Ellen Bosman Affordable Housing Award celebration, an award that we give out to folks every year who do positive things about affordable housing in honor of the memory of Ellen Bosman, who was a champion and one of the founders of AHS, a champion for affordable housing. So we do these regular open to the public education events, and we try to pick topics that are timely, but also just to pick things that really help people understand. This is a very complex subject.
Right.
Doing an affordable housing deal is very complex. So it's not just a simple, well, here's the answer and let's go do it. If it was, we would have solved the problem by now. So we do these every year, but I think we're under increasing pressure right now, seeing what's happening in the community, losing this market rate affordable housing, seeing what's happened, for example, in our census demographic numbers, that we are having more and more people move into this community at the higher end of the income, and we are losing households at the lower end of the income scale. We are starting to lose some of our racial diversity, if you look at 10-year census comparisons. And we think a lot of this is strictly pegged to affordability. And while there are multiple issues regarding affordability in Arlington, and we need to talk about affordable communities, not just affordable housing, housing is at the root of it.
Right.
And housing and childcare, if you look at the national numbers, the gap between Arlington and indeed the Washington region and the rest of the country and those costs is enormous. So we have to kind of expand our view and understand the toll it's taking, not only on the individual households, but on our community if we lose this affordability.
Right.
How are, for example, employers going to keep their employees nearby if they can't afford to live here? Not everybody makes six figures in this community. Yes, we have high income earners, but we also have a lot of service workers, a lot of healthcare workers, public safety workers, lower level tech workers. They need to live somewhere too.
Right. I just want to loop back to the
Sure.
State Affordable Housing,
Yeah.
Because I've been to that, and it's a well-attended event,
Yes.
and you have a variety of speakers, and you really bring in a lot of the developers to
Yes.
have a dialogue with the community about what they're doing.
Yes. And last year we did something new, and I'm hoping that we're going to do it again this year, but we're still kind of scheming. And we had a forum before the State of Affordable Housing last year. And the forum was about micro units, which is a trend that you may have read about in the mainstream press. And when we were out doing public education on affordable housing, doing speeches and talking to community groups, several times people said, well, what about these micro units I'm reading about that are in San Francisco and Boston? And they're really kind of small. And yeah, let's face it, they're largely for probably young single people, but they're small in size and the rents are smaller. What about that? So we started thinking, well, maybe we should put that out there and just get a panel in and have them discuss the various aspects and not sugarcoat it. Here's some of the issues, here's some of the challenges.
Right.
And we ran a forum before the State of Affordable Housing meeting this past May. So the forum went from, I think it was 4 to 5:30, and then we took a half-hour break for refreshments, and then we had the traditional State of Affordable Housing meeting that we do, where we bring in the nonprofit developers to explain what they've been up to and what their major projects are going forward. You're right, and we also have the board chair at the time, the county board chair, and someone from the county housing division to kind of go over some of the statistics, what the county's doing, where we're doing well, where the gaps are. And it's a very popular meeting, and I think we've made it more dynamic, and we've definitely made it more informative, and we have good materials, so that people who are in the room will walk out of there with a sense of where we are and where we're headed, and also where we're not going. So what are the needs?
Right. And the presentations also do a good job of, if someone's coming totally new to the subject, realizing that a lot of these issues are very lengthy in terms of time.
Yes.
That if you're faced with a housing crisis now, you need to work on it because it's going to be years before you're going to see a noticeable effect in the bricks and mortar and in the construction.
These deals take a long time.
Yeah.
They take a long time to close, and then they take a long time to get done. I mean, depending. If you're doing a new construction or substantial rehab, it is a long pipeline, if you will. Yes, they are. And people need to understand that.
Yeah.
They need to understand this complexity and why a lot of pieces have to fit together to make these deals happen.
Right. So let's maybe talk about some of the partners in the Alliance, or some of the groups that you regularly work with. So who are
This
some of the
organization was built with an idea that I thought was really, really well thought out 10 years ago, before my time, and that is that it would be an alliance. So if you look down our stationery, you will see a bunch of organizations listed, nonprofit developers like APA, AHC, Wesley. You'll see faith communities individually. You will see civic groups like the League of Women Voters. So we've tried, and you'll see some civic federations as well, civic associations. So we've tried to find allies in all segments of our community that help us spread the word and help us educate. About a year ago in the fall, we did some focus groups. And focus groups are focus groups. They're not scientific polls, but they were really enlightening. And what we found was that generally people are very supportive of housing affordability, that they do pronounce those progressive values that Arlington is reputed to have. But we also found very, very significant knowledge gaps about housing.
Right.
A lot of people, for example, if you stop them on the street, think we have public housing in Arlington. This is just a fundamental issue. We don't. Every piece of affordable housing is a public-private partnership. We do not have public housing. So if you're finding that people don't even understand the fundamentals, when you're starting to explain complex deals to them, you are you have a huge job to do. So recognizing that, we kind of knew it, but when we had those focus groups, it was very helpful in a sense, because it did give us a little bit of data to confirm what we thought we were seeing. So we knew that we really had to launch even more aggressively on the education side. So in May of 2012, we really started a campaign and had materials and really got out there. And I'm really happy to say that even though in a lot of ways we haven't even scratched the surface, the county has started to step up more and look at the need to educate the community. The county's doing a lot of good things, and the county is telling its story about what it's doing, but it also needs to help the community understand the fundamentals. Because I think if people don't understand why affordable housing is important to them in their situation, whether it's because it sustains the economic development that keeps their property values high, or if it's because it keeps our schools diverse and they want their children in diverse schools, or because they just think it's the right thing to do, if they don't have a personal reason to support housing affordability, then when there's a challenge in their particular neighborhood, there won't be that kind of support that we need to make this happen.
Right, and it's a very complex issue, and so you need support in complex ways.
Yes, very complex. I wish it weren't, quite frankly. It would be a heck of a lot easier if it weren't.
So what, are there any areas you really focus on for, coming up as the State Affordable Housing Forum this year?
Yes, in May.
And then we'll have the, just to review the dates real quickly, the Lecky Forum will be in October?
Probably late September, early October. I've got to find a venue and a date, but roughly in that time frame. And then the Bosman Award, which is our fundraiser, frankly. It's our key fundraiser for the year. That's been in December for the last couple of years, and it's likely to be in December again.
So for the forum coming up, or the State Affordable Housing, do you have a specific issue that?
Not yet.
Okay.
I have it under my hat. I have to talk.
What are some possibilities, I guess, would be
Well, I think what we are really concerned with as a community, and while we should be, is what is our single biggest challenge in Arlington? It's land. Because we don't have much left.
Right.
And that which we do is very expensive. So we have to come to grips with that as a community. And we need to think of ways to help educate people about why, what are the challenges associated with land? If we were in Fairfax County, just as one quick example, we wouldn't have as much of a challenge. And if we were in Texas, that's not the issue. They have other issues, but it's not that there's only this much land left, and by the way, it's $1 million. Right. So, if you start...
Or even Loudoun County.
Loudoun
would be even
that's a good example.
Much less of an issue.
Although Loudoun's starting to struggle more with housing affordability, but their whole demographics and their income levels are just jacking way up.
So it's kind of
it's a different kind of issue. But for us, it's land. It's just the lack of land, and that which is still free to build on is super expensive, and you just have to look at putting more than one unit on that. The other thing we have to do, and our colleagues in Voice have done a fabulous job gathering 10,000 signatures on petitions, is we have got to use our public land better in Arlington. Talking about housing, talking about schools,
Right.
sure, talk about open space, but we have to do better planning and look at this land and get the maximum return on our public land. We have a lot of pressures in Arlington. I, of course, will argue that housing affordability is the fundamental pressure, but okay, maybe I'm paid to say that. We have an issue of schools.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people moving here for good schools. Our schools are overcrowded. So I'm not naive that this is the only issue, but I think if we don't get this one under control in some way better through better planning, then we are going to have a ripple effect everywhere.
Right.
We have to do, and to his credit, County Board Chair Facette on January 2nd said we have got to do, maybe it was the first, said we have got to do better planning with schools in the county. We have to look at our public land.
Right.
We're at a real critical point here in Arlington. We have been very successful as a community for a long time. We've had great economic growth. The region has had great economic growth, but that has plateaued.
Right.
And now we're not the engine in the nation anymore. And now some of the challenges that other communities have faced years ago are starting to end in our lap. We have the Silver Line, we have Fairfax waking up, we have Montgomery County waking up. A lot of people looked at Arlington as the national model for smart growth, and with good reason. But I think our competition for employers and employees is going to get that much more intense. We need to look at how do we get people and keep people here, and we have to start seeing housing as part of infrastructure. It can't be, well, there's transportation and that's important, and infrastructure and that's important, and housing is over here. No, housing is part of our infrastructure. And we have to, I think, I would respectfully submit, develop that mindset. Because if we don't, if we always keep housing over here, it's going to kill us in the end.
Right. And yeah, in terms of the economy, what's happened is our good relationship with federal government spending operations, military spending operations, that kind of hit a peak and has been coming down. And we've had the BRAC realignment, and Crystal City's been losing occupants. So there is this fundamental key drivers of the economy shift going on.
Well, look, the BRAC stuff all hit before I took this job, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm really that conversant, other than to know that caused a lot of vacancies. But there have been other economic pressures independent of the military. Yes, reduced federal spending obviously takes a hit here. But if Arlington wants to develop as an innovation economy, an innovation hub, we are competing for a very prime demographic, bluntly, the 25 to 34-year-olds, which we have high percentages of now.
Right.
I think the highest in the country. But part of my concern is, can we keep folks here?
Right.
If they can only be here for a couple of years and they can't afford to become homeowners here, or even can't afford to keep paying the rents that some of these young people are paying, then what? And you have to convince employers to come here and make the investment for the long haul.
Right, and they're looking at the same set of considerations. They want to retain that young group. They want to retain the innovative group. And so, and it's a different, it's almost become, not just here, but that innovative economy mindset, business development.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere, but I mean, they're more concerned with that retention of the employee and
sure
the housing and the quality of life. And
if they can go to Austin and get an educated workforce for a lot less rent or home prices, and it's a hip city, just one example.
Yeah.
So I think we collectively are challenged in our community right now in ways that we haven't been, I would submit, in a long time.
Right.
That's the challenge. Now here's the good news, right?
I was hoping for the good news.
We are a very well-educated, skilled workforce. We have county government that's progressive and that's considered a model for tackling these kinds of issues head-on. But we all, the community, have to pull in the same direction, I think, to make sure this happens.
Right. So what's the good news? Is it going to happen?
The good news
Are you optimistic?
the good news is we have the capacity to make it happen.
Okay.
Do I think we're going to have to gin up some political will? And I don't mean just our elected officials. I mean at the individual and the neighborhood level.
Right.
Do we have the political will to see beyond what we might want to see beyond and understand that to make housing affordability, for example, happen in Arlington, I have to pay property taxes to help that happen. I may be looking at something at the end of my street that's 2 stories higher than I might optimally like.
Right.
But if we don't build that, our supply's depressed and our rates are up.
Right.
Again, if this was an easy issue, if there were easy answers, it would have been fixed a long time ago. I can't stress enough how complex this is. I mean, one of the things with our public education, you don't want to overwhelm people, but I also think you do them a disservice if you make it sound like it's easy. You wave one magic wand and it's done. We, in the last several years, have really beefed up, for example, our website. If you go to our website, we have a lot of good, I think, a lot of good information. For a small nonprofit, we've spent a fair amount of time trying to really make that robust. So that if someone really wants to learn what are some of the issues, where's a good source of information, what are some of the demographics, they can go to our website. And then we link to other websites. There's a lot of websites out there. Ours is more specific to Arlington, of course.
Do you think that's one of the key features of, say a long-term vision of what the community needs, is that better understanding and that better education? And
Sure,
that better...
sure. And right now the county's in the middle of start to finish, it'll probably be about 3.5-year housing study.
Right.
The county board essentially ordered up a couple of years, well, it's almost 2 years ago now. And one of the things our organization did, working with other advocacy groups, is we said, look, if you're going to do this, make sure that part of the component of this is public education. That it's good to have a housing study working group looking at it, and which is going to wrestle with some of the tough choices.
Right.
But let's not miss this opportunity based on what we've learned that a lot of people don't really understand. As we're doing the hard work of looking at the numbers and the trends and what we can afford to do and where's our dollar better spent, let's make sure we spend some time, since we're going out to the community asking them for their input, make sure we're educating them along the way.
Right.
So one of the key, in our view, one of the key prongs of this housing study is the public education that's going to happen along with it.
Right.
And again, for the commitment to the long term, people have to understand that it's a complex issue. They don't need to know it in great detail, but they need to understand that it's complex. And hopefully, again, they will find a reason why housing affordability and a good housing mix is important to them.
Do you think that's been happening with the housing study?
The education piece really hasn't launched to date. What they've done so far, which has been, by the way, very helpful to folks like me, advocates. The first big piece that's posted on the county's website is they did what's called an interim data report. I think that's pretty much the title. And what they did, staff did, is they went and looked at census data. They went and looked at available sources of data, but packaged it in a way showing trends and in one document. And it's a very rich document. There's a lot of information in there, a lot of graphs and charts. But it really paints a good picture of, based on available data, where are we now?
Right.
It's been very helpful to the work I'm doing, showing people trends. How rent's going up, how incomes are stagnant. A lot of good basic data. But the county is ginning up to do a housing needs survey, which is the first one that's happened in 10 years. Right. And that will go out and go beyond where the kind of the mainstream data sources take us to say, here's the need. We may find, for example, that there's an increased need among seniors that we don't know, or that certain families are really struggling at the margins that we don't know. So this housing needs survey, which I assume will be done over the next year, will give us some really important data about where are the real gaps and where are the needs in housing. And once that data comes in, that's, I think, when the housing working group, of which I am not a member, is going to be really kind of wrestling with where do we go from here. Yeah. And in some sense, almost everything's on the table. Do we need new housing goals? Do we need new policies or principles? Right. What is our 5-year plan? What should be our 10-year plan? It's a big study, and this is the first kind of big community-wide study we've had, I think, since the housing task force that followed Arna Valley. So that was in the late 90s, I believe.
So it's more than 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's probably getting close to that. Yeah, it's probably getting close to that.
I think that's an important point for people to remember. As you're saying, everything's on the table. We need more goals, more strategies, more this. It's not just a question of, okay, we have a budget decision to make, let's put some support to it or not.
Yes.
It goes beyond that in coming up with ways to find solutions.
What have we found that has worked so far? Yeah. Arlington has really, unlike, in a way, more than any other jurisdiction, has really stepped up. to the plate. For example, we have a housing grants program, which is a rent subsidy. A rent subsidy. No other jurisdiction in Virginia has it. And that's how we serve folks, households that are making like 40% or even below of
Right.
median income. It's not open-ended. You know, you have to be either a senior, a disabled person, or a working family. So
Right.
a parent and a child where the parent is working. But the recognition that there are some households whose incomes are so low in Arlington that they need that kind of direct subsidy. So we've had that program, I don't know, I guess for about 10 years, and it's grown as the need has grown, especially in the recession. Even though our recession wasn't acute, there were families that were disproportionately impacted.
Right.
So the issue is, you know, do we keep growing that program, for example, or do we try to create these committed affordable units but make them more affordable for people at lower levels of income?
Right.
It's kind of, I think at the end of the day, there'll be some, where do we make these trade-offs?
Right.
Because creating an affordable rental that's going to be affordable for 30, 40, 50, 60 years at a particular level is not cheap.
Right.
It is not a cheap or easy deal.
No. All right. Well, we'll look forward to the end of the housing study and the public education. We'll hopefully have you
Yes.
back in and talk about things when they take shape.
It is a big process, and the outcome will be a very big deal.
Right. All right. Well, I want to thank our volunteer crew here at Arlington Independent Media. We've had David Cervantes on camera. We've had Hilary Freer and Steve Cordle in the booth. Most of all, I want to thank the Alliance and Mary Rouleau for working so hard to make Arlington a more inclusive community.
Well, I want to say thank you because you have been very generous in covering a lot of our events and posting on YouTube. We're a small organization. I'm part-time. I work out of my house. I got 2 beagles, who are my immediate assistants, and a couple other part-time staffers who are of big help. But we could not do a lot of the media outreach without you. So
All right, well, you're
appreciate
very welcome.
that.
That's what we're here for. All right.